They say you should never turn your back on a lion. But for Elias, the fear wasn't being hunted. It was the heartbreak of having to let go. This isn't just a story about an old ranger and an orphaned cub. It is the journey of a reluctant father who broke nature's most ironclad rule. He fell in love with a wild thing. From a 300-pound secret hidden in a dusty outpost, to a tearful farewell in the unforgiving Badlands, witness the devastating price of trying to rewrite the law of the jungle with only a human heart. The heat in the Kruger doesn't just rise. It presses down. It is a physical weight, a heavy blanket of dust and dry static that settles over the nervous system of every living thing. On the porch of Outpost 4, Elias Thorne sat motionless, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand, his eyes scanning the shimmering horizon line where the scorched earth met the pale, indifferent sky. At 45, Elias moved with the economic precision of a man who had spent half his life looking through a rifle scope. He was a ranger now, a guardian of the boundary, but the ghosts of his past life as a sniper still lingered in the way he sat, still, silent, and dangerously patient. The bushveld was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. It was the silence that precedes a funeral. Then he saw her. She emerged from the acacia scrub like a phantom, a lioness so emaciated that her ribs looked like the hull of a wrecked ship jutting through her tawny hide. She didn't stalk, she didn't prowl, she dragged herself. Her back left leg was a ruin, mangled by the rusted iron teeth of a wire snare that had eaten down to the bone. The smell of necrosis reached Elias before she did, a sweet, cloying scent of decay that cut through the dry air. Elias stood up, his hand instinctively drifting to the bolt-action rifle leaning against the railing. In the wild, an injured predator is a desperate variable. It attacks out of fear. But this lioness didn't look at him with aggression. She looked at him with exhaustion. She limped all the way to the bottom step of his porch, collapsing in the dust with a sound that was more a sigh than a growl. From the shelter of her front paws, something small and golden tumbled out. A cub. A male, no larger than a loaf of bread, his eyes still milky with infancy, his belly hollow from hunger. The mother let out one final, shuddering breath. Her eyes glazed over, fixing on the empty sky. She had spent the last calorie of her life delivering her burden to the only creature she had ever seen disable a trap. It was a transaction, a desperate biological gamble. Elias walked down the steps, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked at the carcass, then at the cub. The ranger in him knew the protocol. Nature is binary. It has no room for miracles. A cub without a mother is dead already. The hyenas would tear it apart before sundown. The merciful thing, the right thing, was a single bullet. It was quick. It was clean. He chambered a round. The metallic clack-clack of the bolt was loud in the silence. He raised the barrel, aiming between the cub's ears. The cub didn't run. It didn't mewl for its mother. It sat on its haunches, trembling slightly, and looked straight up into the black circle of the barrel. Its eyes were wide, devoid of the fear that usually paralyzed prey. It stared at Elias with a strange, profound insolence. Elias paused. His finger hovered over the trigger. He looked closer at the dead mother's leg, at the wire snare that had killed her. His jaw tightened. The wire was twisted in a specific, complex figure-8 knot. It wasn't the work of a desperate villager looking for bushmeat. It was the signature of a syndicate he had been tracking for months. Organized, professional butchers. This wasn't just a natural death. It was a murder. And this cub was the only evidence left behind. The sun beat down on the back of Elias's neck. He engaged the safety on his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. He reached down, his large, calloused hand hovering over the cub. The animal hissed, swiping a tiny paw that couldn't even scratch the leather of Elias's glove. "You're not a pet," Elias muttered, his voice raspy from disuse. "You're a debt." He scooped the animal up. It wasn't heavy, but it felt significant, like holding a live grenade. He turned his back on the vast, indifferent wilderness and carried the creature into the cool shadows of the outpost. He would bury the mother later. Right now, he had a king to feed. He would call him Kahn, a name for a ruler, a name for a survivor, a name that demanded payment in blood. 18 months is a blink in geological time, but for a lion, it is the difference between a plush toy and a demolition crew. Kahn now weighed 300 pounds. He took up the entirety of the outpost's living room floor, a sprawling tapestry of tawny muscle and kinetic potential. When he breathed, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of afternoon sunlight seemed to tremble. Elias Thorne moved around the beast with a practiced, fluid caution. They existed in a silent, domestic détente. Elias would step over the massive tail, and Kahn would crack one golden eye, acknowledge the alpha, and drift back into a heavy, meat-drunk slumber. But the outpost was shrinking. Elias could feel it. The chain-link fence he had reinforced with corrugated iron and scavenged telephone poles was no longer a boundary. It was a pressure cooker. Kahn wasn't a pet. Elias never deluded himself with that softness. He didn't scratch Kahn behind the ears or coo at him. They were roommates in purgatory. Elias provided the meat, goats bought quietly from distant villages, and Kahn provided the silence, filling the empty space where Elias's family used to be. The delusion of safety shattered on a Tuesday, arriving in a dusty Land Rover marked with the veterinary crest. Dr. Sarah Jenkins stepped out of the vehicle, her boots hitting the red dirt with authority. She was a woman of science, pragmatic to the point of cruelty, and one of the few people Elias trusted with his secret. She carried a tranquilizer rifle case, not for use, but as a habit of the trade. "He's too big, Elias," Sarah said, not bothering with a greeting. She stood by the reinforced fence, watching Kahn bat at a tire swinging from a rope. The lion looked majestic, his mane darkening into a thick cowl of black and gold, but his movements were wrong. They were playful, puppy-like. "He looks like a king, but he acts like a golden retriever." Elias leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. "He's healthy. He's alive. That's more than he would be if I'd left him." "Is he?" Sarah turned, her expression hard. "You haven't raised a lion. You've raised a dependency. Look at him. He doesn't know how to kill. He waits for the bowl. If he gets out there, the hyenas won't even have to work for it. They'll eat him alive while he's waiting for someone to ring the dinner bell." "I'm teaching him," Elias lied, his voice grinding like gravel. "You're feeding him," Sarah corrected. "There is a difference, and word is getting out. The villagers are talking about the ghost ranger and his monster. The park authority is doing flyovers." "You're running out of runway, Elias. You have a choice. Zoo or the wild, and right now he's not fit for either." Sarah left a cloud of dust and a heavy silence in her wake. That evening, Elias tried to prove her wrong. He dragged a burlap sack filled with raw meat across the enclosure, jerking it violently to simulate struggle. He wanted to see the killer instinct, the ancient software that should have been hardwired into Kahn's DNA. Kahn watched the sack bounce. He didn't crouch. He didn't stalk. He trotted over, tail wagging, and pawed at it clumsily, looking at Elias with an expectant, dopey expression. He purred, a sound like a diesel engine idling. Elias dropped the rope. A cold knot of failure tightened in his stomach. He hadn't saved the lion. He had broken him. The real test came 3 nights later, brought in by a storm that turned the sky into a strobe light. The rain hammered the tin roof of the outpost, a deafening cadence that usually drowned out the world. But Kahn was restless. He paced the length of the fence, his claws clicking on the concrete, his ears flattened against his skull. He smelled something the rain couldn't wash away. Elias grabbed his flashlight and his rifle, stepping out onto the porch. The beam cut through the deluge, illuminating the perimeter. There, standing just beyond the chain link, was a nightmare carved from shadow. It was a male lion, but calling it a lion felt insufficient. It was a warlord, battle-scarred, missing patches of fur, and possessing a mane that looked like matted wire. One eye was a milky white orb of blindness, the other burned with a terrifying, intelligent malice. The locals called him the Ghost. He was a rogue male, a killer of cubs, a usurper of prides. The Ghost didn't roar. He simply stared. He exhaled, a plume of steam rising from his black lips. He smelled the young male inside. He smelled a challenger. This was the moment. This was nature calling Kahn out to defend his territory. "Go on," Elias whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Scare him off, Kahn. Show him." Kahn stood in the mud, the rain plastering his mane to his neck. He looked at the Ghost. The ancient genetic imperative should have taken over. He should have thrown himself at the fence, roaring a challenge that shook the earth. Instead, Kahn whined. It was a high, pathetic sound, the cry of a lost child. Kahn backed away, his tail tucked firmly between his legs. He didn't look at the enemy. He looked for his father. He scrambled backward, slipping in the mud, until he was pressing his massive, shivering body against Elias's legs, hiding behind the man like a frightened toddler seeking protection from a thunderstorm. Elias stood frozen, the rain soaking him to the bone. He looked at the Ghost, then down at the 300-pound apex predator cowering against his thigh. The Ghost let out a low, chuffing sound, a noise that sounded distinctly like mockery, and turned, disappearing back into the darkness of the bush. He didn't need to fight. There was no king here, just a man and his oversized pet. Elias dropped his hand, resting it on Kahn's trembling head. The fur was wet and coarse. The realization hit him harder than the recoil of his 308. Sarah was right. By saving Kahn's life, Elias had stolen his soul. He had raised a sheep in wolf's clothing. If he kept Kahn here, the authorities would eventually come and put him in a cage or a grave. If he released him now, the Ghost would tear him apart within the hour. Elias looked out into the black void where the Ghost had vanished. His face hardened, the lines around his eyes deepening into a map of resolve. He had made a mistake. Now he had to fix it. And the only way to fix it was to break the one thing he had learned to love. "I'm sorry, boy," Elias whispered into the storm, "but playtime is over." The betrayal began at dawn. It was a calculated, necessary treason. Elias drove the battered Land Rover deep into the Devil's Tooth, a sector of the reserve that tourists never saw, a jagged landscape of granite ridges and thorny scrub where the GPS signal went to die. Kahn sat in the back, panting, his head resting on the roll bar, watching the dust swirl with the innocent excitement of a dog going to the park. He didn't know this was a one-way trip. When Elias stopped the engine, the silence was heavy enough to break teeth. He stepped out, opened the tailgate, and threw a slab of meat onto the red earth. Kahn hopped down, tearing into the flesh. Elias didn't say goodbye. Goodbyes were for humans. This was a severing. He got back into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and revved the engine. Kahn looked up, blood on his muzzle. He trotted toward the truck, expecting the door to open, expecting the ride home. Elias gritted his teeth so hard his jaw popped. He shifted into gear and floored it. Kahn ran. He ran alongside the vehicle, letting out confused, high-pitched yelps. He was fast, keeping pace with the tires, his golden eyes locked on Elias's profile through the dusty glass. "Why are you running? Why am I outside?" Elias watched in the side mirror, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face, until he couldn't take it any more. He grabbed his pistol and fired a single shot into the air. Bang! The crack of the gunshot shattered Kahn's trust. The lion skidded to a halt, flinching. The truck sped away, disappearing into a cloud of red dust, leaving the king of the living room alone in the empire of the dead. 3 days later, the king was a beggar. Elias watched from a ridge 2 miles away, peering through high-powered optics. What he saw sickened him. Kahn was starving. He had been chased off a kill by a clan of hyenas, scavengers that a true male lion would have crushed with a single paw swipe. But Kahn didn't know he was a weapon. He still thought he was a guest. He was gaunt, his coat matted with burrs, a bewildered ghost wandering through hell. "He's going to die, Elias," Sarah's voice crackled over the radio. She was back at the station, monitoring Kahn's tracking collar. "Pull him out." "Not yet," Elias whispered, though every fiber of his being wanted to start the truck. "He hasn't found it yet." Found what? The hate. The catalyst arrived on the 4th afternoon. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that made the hair on Elias's arms stand up. Smoke, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of rusted iron. Poachers. Through the binoculars, Elias saw them before Kahn did. 3 men moving with the furtive crouch of predators, setting wire snares along a game trail. The same signature knots. The same syndicate that had murdered Kahn's mother. Kahn was lying in the long grass, winded and weak. But then the scent hit him. It wasn't the smell of food. It was the smell of memory. Deep in the amygdala of the lion's brain, a dormant circuit sparked to life. The smell of the wire. The smell of the men who brought death. The confusion that had plagued Kahn for days evaporated. The dog that Elias had raised died in that grass. Kahn stood up. He didn't chuff. He didn't whine. His tail twitched, a sharp, agitated whip. The poachers were closing in on a young lioness trapped in a ravine, part of the ghost's pride, separated and vulnerable. One of the men raised a machete. Elias reached for his rifle, his finger finding the trigger guard. He was too far away to take the shot. "Come on, Kahn," he hissed. "Wake up!" Down in the valley, the air exploded. It wasn't a bark. It was a roar that sounded like a tectonic plate shifting, a deep, resonant thunder that vibrated in Elias's chest 2 miles away. Kahn launched himself from the cover. He didn't look like a golden retriever anymore. He moved with a terrifying, fluid violence. He hit the lead poacher with the force of a freight train, 400 pounds of muscle turning a human body into a rag doll. The impact was sickeningly audible. The other 2 men scrambled, firing wild shots from AK-47s. Dust kicked up. Kahn didn't retreat. He didn't flinch at the noise. He swiped, his claws extending fully for the first time, shredding the air and the arm of the second man. The poachers screamed, a sound of primal terror, and dropped their weapons, scrambling up the ravine walls, abandoning their gear and their dignity. Kahn stood over the wounded man, his chest heaving. He didn't kill him. He looked at the trembling human, then turned his massive head to the cowering lioness. He chuffed softly. He had defended. He had conquered. Up on the ridge, Elias lowered the binoculars. He felt a surge of pride, followed immediately by a cold wash of dread. The radio crackled. It wasn't Sarah this time. It was the park warden, his voice icy. "Elias, we have a report. Tourists heard shots. A satellite scan shows an attack. Your animal just mauled a human being." "They were poachers," Elias barked into the mic. He was defending the pride. "It doesn't matter," the warden replied. "He has tasted human blood. He's crossed the line. Protocol is clear. I'm dispatching the suppression team. You have 1 hour to locate the carcass, or we will leave him for the vultures." The line went dead. Elias threw the radio onto the passenger seat. This was the nightmare scenario. Kahn had finally become a lion, and for that crime he was sentenced to death. Elias fired the engine. The sun was setting, painting the sky the color of a fresh bruise. He had to get to Kahn before the death squad did. He had to save his boy one last time, not by bringing him home, but by driving him away forever. The Land Rover crested the ridge, tires spinning on loose shale, just as the sun began to bleed out over the horizon. Below, in the natural amphitheater of the dry riverbed, Elias saw the final trial. Kahn was not alone. The poachers had fled, but their violence had drawn a darker presence. The ghost, the one-eyed tyrant of the Southern Territory, stood over the carcass of the poacher's victim. He was a scarred monolith of muscle and hate, and standing between the ghost and the cowering lioness was Kahn. Kahn was bleeding. His flank was torn from the earlier skirmish, his chest heaving. He looked small against the veteran killer. Elias slammed the truck into park and grabbed his rifle. He scrambled to the edge of the ridge, the scope snapping to his eye. The crosshairs settled perfectly behind the ghost's ear. One squeeze, 4 pounds of pressure, and Elias could end the threat. He could save his boy. Kahn looked up. Through the magnified optic, Elias saw the young lion's eyes lock onto him. There was a flicker of recognition, a desperate plea. "Help me. Do what you always do." Elias's finger tightened on the trigger. But then Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "If you step in, you kill the lion to save the pet." If Elias fired now, Kahn would survive the day, but he would never survive the life. He would forever be a dependent, a broken thing, waiting for a savior. With a shuddering breath that felt like inhaling broken glass, Elias lowered the rifle. "No," Elias whispered, the word tearing at his throat. "You stand on your own feet, or you die on them." Kahn watched the rifle lower. He saw the man turn away. The realization hit the animal with the force of a physical blow. The safety net was gone. The god had abandoned him. Fear vanished, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. The ghost lunged. It was a blur of violence, a maneuver that had killed a dozen rivals. But Kahn didn't back down this time. He didn't cower. He met the charge head-on. He didn't fight like a wild lion, flailing and biting. He fought with the calculated precision of a creature who had spent his life wrestling with tires and ropes. He ducked the swipe, drove his shoulder into the ghost's exposed chest, and clamped his jaws, not on the mane, but directly on the windpipe. The hold was absolute. The ghost thrashed, claws raking Kahn's back, but the young king held on. He squeezed until the struggling stopped, until the valley fell silent. Headlights swept across the ravine. The Park Authority suppression team had arrived. 3 trucks skidded to a halt, armed rangers spilling out, weapons raised. "Target acquired," a voice shouted. "Drop him!" "Hold your fire!" Elias screamed, sliding down the embankment, his badge held high in the air. He placed his body between the firing line and the panting, blood-soaked lion. "Step aside, Thorne," the warden yelled. "That animal is a man-eater." "Look at the ground!" Elias roared, pointing at the dead body of the ghost. "He didn't attack a tourist. He took out the rogue that's been slaughtering your herds for 3 years. That's not a nuisance animal. That is the new dominant male of this territory. You shoot him, you violate the Preservation Act." The warden lowered his binoculars. He saw the dead tyrant. He saw the lioness emerging from the brush to nuzzle Kahn's shoulder. The logic of the wild had spoken. "Stand down," the warden ordered, his voice tight. The trucks retreated, their lights fading into the distance. Silence returned to the bush. Elias turned to face Kahn. The lion stood 10 feet away, his golden coat stained dark with victory. Elias felt a surge of overwhelming emotion. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out, the old habit of comfort surfacing. "You did it, boy. You're okay." Kahn didn't purr. He didn't rub his head against Elias's hand. A low, rumbling growl vibrated in Kahn's chest, a sound so deep it rattled Elias's. Teeth. Kahn bared his teeth. It wasn't the playful snarl of the living room, it was a boundary. "Do not touch me. I am not yours." Elias froze. The rejection was sharper than any claw. But as he looked into those amber eyes, he saw no malice, only sovereignty. Kahn was no longer a son, he was a king, and kings do not have owners. Kahn held the gaze for one long, eternal second, acknowledging the debt was paid. Then he turned his massive back on Elias. He let out a soft chuff to the lioness, and together they vanished into the tall grass, walking straight into the heart of the darkness without looking back. The coffee on the porch was cold. Elias sat in the same chair, the silence of the outpost now complete. There was no heavy breathing on the floorboards, no tail thumping against the wall. He opened the station logbook. He found the entry for Kahn, hand-reared Panthera Leo. He took a red pen and drew a thick final line through the name. Beside it, in his neat block lettering, he wrote, "Status. Released. Location. Unknown. Condition. Wild." Elois closed the book. He took a sip of the bitter coffee, looked out at the vast, terrifying, beautiful horizon, and for the first time in years, he smiled. He was alone again. But out there, somewhere in the dark, a part of him was roaring at the stars. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.